Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. I am Tony Gerdeman, here as always with Tom Orr. Tom, how's it going?
The extra long power pause means we must be in the off season. There must not be that much to talk about. But Tony, there's plenty to talk about. You can't keep us waiting like that. Come on with the show. Let's go.
Indeed, there is plenty to talk about, and we'll start with this episode by discussing some of what we saw in Michigan's spring game. And I just like the fact that they actually had a spring game this time around, because generally they don't. They just choose to do some really boring practice instead of just a semi-boring spring game. But we got to see a little bit of a lot of things. The maize team, featuring the maize jerseys, defeated the blue team featuring the blue jerseys 17-7. I did like the fact that they went old school, and I say old school by doing the draft, having a draft of teams like we've seen Jim Tressel do that in the past, where you get a couple of captains and they select the teams up rather than just doing offense and defense. And I think it's probably a pretty good sign that they're able to field two completely separate offensive lines, given the losses that they've had on the offensive line. But the main thing, Tom, that we need to talk about, Michigan tackled from the outset. And I saw RJ Young of Fox and Twitter tweet out the fact that Michigan tackled all game long and Ohio State didn't tackle until the second half, to which I had to send a link of some tackling that Ohio State was doing in the second quarter. But I didn't mean to, actually, but it's just funny how the notion and the two things, the Michigan tackling and Ohio State not tackling initially, are viewed as some sort of grand sweeping judgment by some.
So you're telling me that people had hashtag takes on the internet after a spring game? Yeah, this is not exactly a brand new thing. Lots of teams don't tackle in the spring game. Michigan, I think during that broadcast, it made it sound like they tackled a bunch during practices too, which that to me is more interesting than they tackled during the whole spring game, as opposed to Ohio State didn't tackle for like 2 drives at the beginning of the game, which is what they've done for years and years and years now. Because it's great to be real good and big and tough and tackle during the spring game, but what exactly are you gaining by doing that versus what are the odds that someone, breaks a leg or something like that? Like, this is the famous Mike Tomczak story where spring 1983 or whatever it was, they tackled during the spring game, and then Mike Tomczak broke his leg, and that really screwed up that season. So, I think, Tony, the bigger question is Michigan's quarterbacks were in no contact jerseys. So, Tony, does that mean the Michigan quarterback room is soft? I don't know. I'm not sure I can come up with a take possibly hot enough about what this means about the Michigan quarterback room.
Well, I mean, Alex Orji did have an 18-yard touchdown run, so let's go easy on criticizing of the softness. But overall, we talk about you can never make broad sweeping judgments on quarterbacks or really much of anything in the spring, because as we always say, it's just one practice of 15 of 40 eventual practices before the season starts. But the topic of the quarterbacks and the tackling aspect of it, I did notice, I don't know if you notice this, Alex Orji kind of limping around at the end of the game after on the final drive, which interesting. Nothing much there, but it's just the fact that he looked like he was a little bit hobbled, and maybe tackling is not so great a thing. But the quarterbacks is what we're going to be mainly focused on today, because you have Alex Orji, who starts it, goes 13 of 18 for 103 yards, long completion of just 12 yards, sacked 3 times, a touch sack, so that doesn't really mean much. But when I'm watching him, I just saw a lot of fastballs, and mostly the completions were generally just 5-6 yards down the field, and sometimes he'd throw like 8 yards down the field, and it was like, wow, that looked like a longer throw, and it's like, actually it was only 8 yards. But my thoughts there is I've viewed him kind of like a poor man's Jalen Milroe, where he's a fantastic athlete. We saw him run for like an 18-yard touchdown, but can he do the rest of the things that you need your quarterback to do? And Jalen Milroe got Alabama to the playoffs, but he couldn't get them beyond that. And we've really seen nothing of Alex Orji throwing the ball until this spring game. And I wasn't encouraged.
No, I watched him and Joe Milton's name popped into my head, and he doesn't have Joe Milton's arm strength necessarily, and he's probably a little more elusive than Joe Milton, but just like you said, there's one speed, and that speed is fast, and so he's throwing these little dump outs, these little angle routes to the backside of the backfield, and it's coming a million miles an hour, and the ball placement's not always great. He threw, there was a lot of unintentional back shoulders where, like, there's no reason to make it a back shoulder throw. You just didn't lead the receiver enough. I think when you look at quarterbacks, and teams will tell you what they think about a quarterback, but when the teams show you what they think about a quarterback, that means a lot more to me. Alex Orji, Tony and I have talked about this already. Listeners at home, I'd like you to think about Alex Orji's 2 years at Michigan and how many passes he has attempted in those 2 years at Michigan. Ready? Pencils down. One pass attempt in 2 years. That does not scream to me coaching staff that deeply believes this is a player who's going to be, really, really effective in the passing game. Which, then, maybe it's confirmation bias that you really didn't see it, but they didn't throw it downfield with him a lot during the spring game. It was not generally super accurate during the spring game. And the offensive line, we'll get to the offensive line later, I'm sure, but the offensive line is always really a complicating factor in these games because you can't protect long enough to, have some guy run 40 yards down the field and heave one down there generally. But you're keeping it simple. It's a spring game. I get it. But I have yet to see anything from Alex Orji that makes me think this is a quarterback who could win a Big Ten championship for Michigan, let alone a national championship. I have yet to see it. And based on the way that Michigan has sort of treated him over the course of his career, I'm guessing that Michigan hasn't really seen it either.
I would counter that by also saying we've seen them hide J.J. McCarthy and protect him, and they won a national championship with him. So maybe there's a little counterpoint, but we also saw much more throwing from J.J. McCarthy earlier in his career than we have with Orji, and really this is going to be Orji's first time out there, assuming he's the guy. And I'll go again, say C.J. Stroud had no passes attempted before he was thrown out there as a starter in 2021. A little bit different circumstances, different quarterbacks for sure.
Oh, so were Alex Orji's 2 years actually secretly 1 year and it was also COVID? No? Oh, well then, in that case, no, I don't think I'm necessarily going to draw a ton of conclusions from that.
Okay, Tom, you can go ahead and be the contrarian here when I'm just trying to spit facts, and then you can try to cloud everything up with information. It's not going to be me. There are 4 quarterbacks on the day. I don't know, was Jack Tuttle injured?
Injured, yes. Injured,
okay.
Was not available. I looked that up because I had the same thought. Like, I was expecting him to be one of the first guys out there. And it sounds like they're treating him like he's, very much a part of this conversation, which, that's another little bit of a red flag to me. Like, you never know. Maybe they're blowing smoke. But if a guy who is in his 7th year and hasn't really ever been a regular player is really legitimately part of your quarterback battle, at some point you should be able to separate from a guy who's played 6 years and hasn't actually been a regular starter. If you can't separate from that guy, that is a little bit of a concern for me.
Tom, again, I will tell you, Jack Tuttle last year, 15 of 17 passing for 130 yards and a touchdown. 88% completion percentage. You're going to tell me that that's not good enough to be a starter at Michigan?
If these trends continue,
but Tuttle to me is much like Chris Chuganoff, Gunnar Hoke, Tristan Gebbia last year for Ohio State, where you want that guy that has experience in case something happens that is catastrophic. You're not wanting him to be the best quarterback option on your team. And they've got other guys there. Jaden Davis is a true freshman. I don't think it's going to happen this year for him. Davis Warren is a fourth-year guy. Jaden Denigal is a third-year guy. Warren was 6 of 9 for 136 yards, 2 long touchdown passes in the fourth quarter. Jaden Denigal 2 for 6 with a bad interception and 39 yards. To me, this is Alex Orji and probably Jack Tuttle in terms of the competition. And I don't know what that means for the season. Like, is that, we've talked about the win totals in the past. Is this a quarterback room, duo, group that can win the Big Ten or make the playoffs?
I don't think it's a quarterback group that's going to lead them to the Big Ten. I mean, we have seen not tremendous quarterbacks win the Big Ten in the past. I think winning the Big Ten this year is going to be harder than it has been in the past because you've got Oregon in the league now, and some of the other West Coast teams. Oregon, I think, is the one that gives me the most pause in terms of what it's going to actually take to win the Big Ten this year. You're not playing Iowa or Purdue in the Big Ten championship game anymore. But I don't know. I don't think there's anyone on this team that I look at and go, that's a guy who's going to be the quarterback of an 11-1 team, unless it's a absolutely lights out defense where you're winning games 17-3. There is not a 35 points a game quarterback on that roster, as far as I can tell. Now, a lot of that, I would include Davis Warren in that conversation as well. He has never blown me away in the fall, but he looked, he made some plays during the spring game. I think it's more likely Davis Warren starts than Jack Tuttle. I would have it as in Alex Orji Davis Warren thing, with Jack Tuttle sort of being on the being the guy who, if one of those guys transfers before the season, then you don't have to throw Jaden Davis in there in September if someone gets hurt. That would be how I would probably handicap it right now. But I haven't really seen it from either of those guys yet. But there's so much that goes into this. Like we're talking about this as is this a quarterback that can win the Big Ten for them? And do they have an offensive line that can win the Big Ten? Does the Donovan Edwards that we saw on Saturday, was that the Donovan Edwards you're going to see this fall, who actually looks like Donovan Edwards, or is it going to be the guy who was running for 2.3 yards per carry for most of last season and then had a couple big plays in the national championship game? What is the wide receiver unit going to look like this year? They've one returning starter. They put up a graphic with the returning starters on offense, and it was Colston Loveland, end of list. And that's a lot of different places where I have no interest in even pretending to evaluate the offensive line from that, because you're dividing guys up and all that stuff, and you're mixing and matching. And it was a tire fire. There was constant pressure. I read absolutely nothing into that, but that is not a solved problem for Michigan. And so you gotta, they have to have a good offensive line. I think their offensive line will be fine. I don't know that it's going to be great. So if you have a not great quarterback and a, good maybe to maybe very good offensive line, but not incredible, and then your running back is Donovan Edwards, who's, maybe we'll see, and you've got Colston Loveland, and you've got a completely unproven group of wide receivers, there's a lot of question marks there. And that is not an offense that the whole rest of the package feels like it can drag a, 3 out of 5 kind of quarterback to a Big Ten championship.
Yeah, I do wonder how many number one receivers they have, and is it just a couple of 2s and a 3? The Davis Warren thing is interesting to me because I'm with you in that he has certainly more potential, you would think, than Jack Tuttle, because you kind of know what Jack Tuttle is. He's thrown for 1,000 yards in his career over 5 years of playing, whereas Warren, a bit younger, but probably has more potential because of the unknown. You know what Jack Tuttle is. You don't know what Davis Warren is, so that means he's better, and at least the potential is there. The offensive line and trying to pick and choose there, I'm not convinced that the offensive line won't receive some reinforcements from the portal here in the next little bit of time that is left. And I was watching a Michigan podcast yesterday, and they're discussing the possibilities of, can this Michigan team repeat? And one of the hosts is like, I think so. All they need is, and I'll try to get all of these correct, a tackle, like a left tackle or right tackle, a defensive tackle to pair with, behind Kenneth Grant, like another nose tackle, a corner opposite Will Johnson, perhaps a safety in there, and I think maybe a linebacker as well. So just those 5 things, and then boom, you've got yourself another national championship. And defensively, I think they're going to be fine. I do think there are some concerns in the secondary. You lose Rod Moore, and that's not great. Is there a corner opposite Will Johnson? I know they were making some plays in the secondary a little bit, so that's good. Linebacker, I thought Ernest Hausman looked good running to the ball. You lose Junior Colson, that's going to be tough to replace. And I know the NFL draft people are loving Michael Barrett, who is also gone. You've got to replace him. But they've seemed to be able to do that pretty well over the years. And like I'm fully expecting this to be one of the Big Ten's best defenses, but I don't think it's going to be the best defense. I think they've lost too much, and we'll see what they can do. You lose Rod Moore, I think is a significant blow, but they'll be one of the top 4 or 5 defenses and have the opportunity to really slow down some of the poorer Big Ten offenses. But defensively, I didn't see anything that really concerned me.
No, I think the defense is going to be good to very good again. We'll see if they live up to last year's standard, and they might. I think there's a better chance the defense lives up to last year's standard than the offense does. I'm confused, though, where these players are going to come from, Tony, because I know how Michigan fans and podcasters feel about buying a championship and buying a team. So I'm not sure how they're going to be adding all of these pieces through the portal. But, even more concerningly on that part is there aren't that many names in the portal right now. The portal's open for another week or so till the end of the month. And there have been fewer names in there than you would have probably expected. There's certainly fewer names than I expected. Mm-hmm. And that's true. Ohio State so far has had 2 guys enter the portal. I was guessing ballparking, 5, 6, something like that, maybe after the spring. And so far they just the numbers haven't been there. And also you haven't really seen the high profile guys go in the portal. There've been a few. I know Michigan State had a defensive tackle go in the portal who was a pretty significant player, but there is not a Caleb Downs out there right now. There's not, there are not right now the offensive linemen that Michigan has brought in the past. Michigan has brought in a Remington Award winner and a Remington Award finalist through the portal in the last couple of years. And, I think that would probably certainly help with the offensive line if they could pull in someone like that, but there's no one like that in the portal right now. So I think that, the availability of guys is going to be a little bit of a limiting factor for them. We'll see, maybe there's another week, who knows? Maybe someone will, a bunch of other guys will jump in, but so far it's been a little bit slower than I was expecting, except for Colorado. If there's anyone you want off Colorado's roster, they're probably in the portal. But other than that, it's been relatively slow. There are a lot of questions for this year's Michigan team, and there's a lot of new coaches. There's a lot of new, a completely new offense. The defense has, the Rod Moore injury, I think, is one that it reminds me a little bit of when Christian Bryant got hurt in 2013 for Ohio State, broke his ankle, and all of a sudden, an Ohio State defense that looked fantastic, all of a sudden is giving up a bunch of big plays, and it's like, boy, what happened? They only lost 1 guy. It's like, yeah, that guy was pretty important. And Rod Moore was pretty important to that Michigan defense. Getting him back this year was, that was like, okay, well, that's a really big piece for them to get back. And then you lose him and he's out for the year. And boy, that's a real blow. And that's one more spot they got to figure out now.
I remember that Christian Bryant injury. I think was it 2013, 2012, but 2013
yeah.
With Urban after the game, just like pounding the podium, like how angry he was that happened. Cause he knew at that point, like how devastating it was. And then you go back, 7 years before that when Anderson Russell got hurt in 2006 and Jamario O'Neal had to play for him down the stretch. And Urban Meyer then went and attacked Jamario O'Neal in the national championship game and took advantage of that situation. So Urban Meyer got his comeuppance for attacking an Ohio State safety by having the same situation happen to him. I hope he was happy about that one. That's justice, but exacted against Ohio State twice. I don't know if that's actually justice, but let's digress, if we will. The portal action has been lackluster. I chalk this up to the fact that agents are communicating their portal the needs to the current teams, and the current teams are like, okay, we'd like to keep you, so here's your money, as opposed to let's jump out into the free agency and see what's out there. I think teams have done a pretty good job of keeping their players. I still am surprised Ohio State has only had 2 players as of this recording, because I still have like 8 or 9 drafts of players in the portal, stories written, waiting for it to happen. But as Tom, I was watching the spring game, and you look at Michigan's schedule, and they show week 2, Texas at Michigan. So, oh gosh, what a great game that's going to be. I can't wait to watch it. And then you recall what Arch Manning did in the Texas spring game by throwing for, I don't know, like 350 yards and 3 touchdowns. And that poor guy, he's going to be sitting behind Quinn Ewers this year. We'll get to play here and there, but it's going to have to sit basically for 2 years to be able to play a 3rd year at Texas next year. When I'm also looking at this Michigan thing, they don't have a returning starting quarterback. If you are Michigan and you have national title hopes, you've got a defense that you like, you've got a running game that you like, you've got an offensive line that you believe will come together, you've got some young receivers that you think can make it work, why don't you have your collective go all in on bringing Arch Manning to Michigan? If the final missing piece is a quarterback and you want to continue doing what you were able to do last year, that final piece is a quarterback, why aren't you doing everything in your power to go and get that quarterback?
I think there's 3 separate things here. One is, when you say final piece, that implies that all of the other pieces have been found, and I don't think that that's probably true. I also think that, I don't know how much Arch Manning's going to want to play in a offense where he's potentially going to be running more and getting hit more. That, we'll see what, that maybe not. I did, however, when I was watching the Texas spring game highlights, and this is, I don't know, whatever, Saturday night or Sunday morning or whatever it was, I had 2 thoughts. One, boy, Texas's secondary sure isn't very good. And number 2, I had the same thought, like, boy, I don't know that he's going to want to sit another year, sit 2 years. And I don't know that he's going, I think he's got options, certainly. And boy, Michigan's expected win total in my mind would probably jump by a win just by adding him. I think the quarterback limitations this year are going to keep them maybe to like a 9-ish win team. I mean, that is not an easy schedule that they've got this year, especially with Texas out of conference. That might be an 8-4, 9-3 kind of team. You put a legitimate quarterback on that roster, I think that maybe makes it a 9-3, 10-2 kind of team to me. It's not crazy. It's like, this is one of these things that might make sense for all parties involved. I don't think it's a final piece thing. I don't think that suddenly takes them to a 12-0 kind of team. But you might be a playoff team. You might be, you're the whatever 9 seed or the 10 seed or something like that as a 10-2, 9-3 team. Maybe you're the 8 seed and you get to host a playoff game. I don't expect Michigan to make the playoff as their roster is currently constructed. If you put an Arch Manning on there and maybe you plug one or two of those other holes with someone else, then they probably are. So it's one of those things that makes sense. I'm not expecting it to happen, but it's one of those things that it kind of would make sense for all parties involved. However, Tony, I'm guessing that if Arch Manning went in the portal, Michigan would probably not be the only team that was picking up the phone to try and reach him.
Maybe if he went quietly and other teams didn't notice it. But a guy like him, or any significant upgrade at quarterback, could be the difference between 8-4 and 9-3, or 9-3 and 10-2. And the difference between 9-3 and 10-2 is the playoffs. And once you get in, then anything can happen. Because you look at the schedule, they don't go on the road until October 5th. So their first 5 games are at home, but it's Fresno State, Texas, Arkansas State, USC, and Minnesota. And then they go to Washington, and then they have a week off, and then they go to Illinois. And I think that's an interesting three-week stretch of at Washington, bye week, at Illinois, and then they have Michigan State at home. Like, while we're talking about the Texas and USC, and they have Oregon at home, and they have to go to Ohio State, there's something about that little 3-game stretch of at Washington, at Illinois, Michigan State at home, before Oregon comes to town, where I wouldn't be shocked to see a trip up there, but with an upgraded quarterback, maybe that doesn't happen. And that's one of those things, like, as long as Michigan can just win the games they're supposed to, and that would put them at 9-3. If they can, if they can get one of those other 3 wins that they're probably going to be not necessarily favored in, say Texas and Oregon and at Ohio State. Now the good news is 2 of those are at home, so stealing one of them wouldn't be a shock. But I'd feel better about their chances if they had a more impactful, perhaps, passer, quarterback, and it doesn't necessarily have to be Arch Manning, but I'm just imagining the attention that week 2 game of Quinn Ewers versus Arch Manning would get in Ann Arbor. Probably big noon kickoff, I would think.
I think didn't they announce that on the spring game? They know they were saying big noon kickoff was coming for that game already. They announced that on the spring game. So yeah, I would guess that might be your big noon kickoff game that week. I'm with you on. I think Texas, they're going to be an underdog almost certainly. Ohio State, they're going to be an underdog almost certainly. Oregon, they're probably going to be an underdog. And there is no great shame in that. That might be 3 of the 5 best teams in the country.
Mm-hmm.
You could still be a pretty darn good team and lose to all 3 of those. Even if you steal one, at Washington is, we'll see what year 1 of Jed Fish looks like at Washington. They lost a ton of guys. I don't think they're going to be anything close to what they were last year, but you've got two of the other playoff teams plus Oregon plus Ohio State on the roster on the schedule this year. That is a rough schedule. And for a team that has kind of spent the last couple of years taking the non-conference basically like spring training and going through September and barely breaking a sweat, you don't have that luxury this year. You don't have the luxury of having, going into the season with 2 quarterbacks and, we'll start one in week 1 and we'll start one in week 2 and we'll see how it goes like they did a couple of years ago. This is the pool. You get thrown into the deep end of the pool pretty quickly. I think I'm struggling to see them beating Texas, Oregon, Ohio State with the current quarterback lineup that they've got there. Again, maybe you can add a bunch of guys in the portal and make a big, make enough improvements other places that that you can get away with the quarterbacks they've got. I just don't see it. At Washington, probably not as tricky as it looks. USC, I'm not so sure the Lincoln Riley thing's going to work out at USC. You keep looking at it and it's like there's not, the recruiting's okay. The line play there has not been great. Like it feels like it might be getting late early for Lincoln Riley and USC. We'll see how the Big Ten thing goes. It might not go great, but this is not us saying Michigan's going to go 6-6 or anything, but this is a pretty tricky schedule, and there are plenty of questions there. If I don't know what how many guys they're going to have drafted. I know it was they were talking about, Harbaugh was talking about 20 at one point. I don't think you're getting to 20, but go back and look at the history of teams that have lost. Like 1998, after the 98 season, Ohio State lost, I think, 14 guys the NFL draft. They went from 11-1 to 6-6 the next year. I don't think Michigan's going to do that. But if you don't recruit at an elite level, and Michigan's recruiting has been good, but not, Georgia, Ohio State, Alabama kind of good, and you're not adding a ton of guys in the portal, and they haven't, that's going to be a tough thing to overcome.
For sure. And I'm not expecting them to go into the portal to get a quarterback. As you said, there needs to be somebody in there, and there aren't right now. So this would have to be somebody new. I just thought it was interesting looking at the possibilities there. And whoever is starting at quarterback for Michigan, you'll get that start against Texas at home. So you've got that support. You'll have he'll have 8 starts before the Oregon game, so that will help. Then of course the trip to Ohio State is going to be the toughest for them in terms of the environment. The game at Washington will be loud-ish, but it's going to be a different type of situation when they get to Ohio State. It will be fascinating to see if they beat Texas, then the hype train is going to be off the rails, and it's going to be like they're back, and they're going to have that first 5 games at home, and then you go on the road and you win it at Washington, and half of your regular season is done, and now you can just bask in the bye week before you go to Illinois and have Michigan State and Oregon at home. But watch out for that trip to Memorial Stadium in Bloomington, or don't. That's fine. But then you get the bye week, and then you have Northwestern at home, and then at Ohio State. So some really interesting matchups, and it's going to be a fun September. I am guessing this is close to the best home ticket that Michigan has ever had. Now, back in the day, every year before like 1999, all of the non-conference schedules were always really good. So you'd have Miami coming in, you'd have Florida, whatever. So I'm sure there are some pretty good ones, but Texas and USC and Oregon right now coming in and Michigan State. I mean, that's a pretty good ticket.
Yeah, that is a pretty good ticket. I know we're going to wrap up, but I do want to give me in order of likelihood, Michigan's first 6 games. We just talked about them: Fresno State, Texas, Arkansas State, USC, Minnesota, at Washington. Those 6 games, give me in order of likelihood their records. So it's most likely that their record after those 6 games will be.
I would probably go 5-1 ahead of 4-2. Maybe 5-1, 4-2, 6-0, 3-3.
That's, I think, what I would go with. Yeah, I think 5-1 is probably the most likely. 4-2, 4-2. Just there's a bunch of chances to lose. You got 3 losable games in those 6. I think you're more likely to lose. I think the Texas one is almost like right in an ink a loss to me.
Right.
The other 2, if Michigan beats Texas, I think that is one of the things that would make the biggest change, in my opinion, of this season. Like, either that means Texas is not anywhere close to what we think they are, or Michigan is way better than we think they are. That is going to be potentially the big overreaction early week 2 game where, we've seen Notre Dame and Texas, and one of them, Texas beats Notre Dame, and it's in overtime, and it's, oh my gosh, Texas is back, and then it was like, oh, Texas is back to being 6-6 again. If Michigan beats Texas, that to me would be that would be pretty surprising. So yeah, I'm with you. 5-1, 4-2, 6-0, 3-3.
Yeah, because that Texas game just feels more certain than anything else, which kind of eliminates the likelihood of 6-0 for me. But God help Quinn Ewers if he loses that game, because then it's all going to be Arch Manning from there on. So maybe we will get an Arch Manning starting this season, thanks to Michigan, one way or another. So that will do it. Want to thank you all for tuning in. As always, please continue to hit the thumbs up on this YouTube if you have not yet done so. And if you're listening on your podcast platform of choice, a 5-star rating and review is always welcome. And the best way to support us in what we do, you can find us at BuckeyeHuddle.com. Join up, become a member. As Tom says, for the price of a lousy, I always say the lazy part, and it's like, you know what? I'm not trying to disparage the chain stores. They're not lazy. They're hustling like anybody else. A lousy chain store pizza. Join up and check us out there. So thank you all for tuning in, and we will talk to you guys later.